In this series of clips, we're going to look at what will be perhaps the bitterest pill to swallow in our examination of sentimentality in The Birth of a Nation. Now, in Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, the character of Uncle Tom is a decidedly non-violent figure. While he does resist Legree in a very important religious and moral sense, he does not advocate, endorse, or even participate in any sort of violent overthrow or revolution against the existing status quo. In fact, when Cassie even gives him the opportunity to do so, he turns it down and reminds Cassie that she should trust in the Lord and should not engage in wicked or violent behavior. This contrasts sharply with The Birth of a Nation, where social change is effected through violent scenes, up to and including the lynching of freed Southern blacks. And yet, in spite of the violence used to resolve the movie's conflict, Griffith still maintains sentimentalizing elements in his portrayal of the Cameron family. In fact, in a shocking move, we are going to see Griffith argue in favor not of a sort of modernist utopian setting wherein segregation of the races leads to the perfect state of peace and harmony now and forever. Instead, Griffith's film argues that such violence and such social order is only the best that we can do until the second coming of Christ. Now, it may seem a little shocking for contemporary viewers that Jesus is going to make an appearance in this pro-KKK movie. But that's exactly what Griffith is going to do, and he's going to use the strategy for full effect. Now, as we watch the final scenes of the movie, pay close attention to how the victory of the Klan is tied not only to the comic plot, but also to the coming of the New Jerusalem at the end of history. The disarming of the freed blacks is, of course, the first step in this victory of the KKK. With only the Klansmen retaining their weapons, Griffith corrects the earlier disempowerment that took place in the film. Rather than having freed Southern blacks acting as a militia for the South and enforcing the will of radicals through their weapons, now the Klansmen have literally the firepower through which to enact their will. But that's not the only thing Griffith is going to do to correct the disempowerment we saw earlier. This victory parade should be paid very close attention to, for the Confederate soldiers earlier in the movie never got a victory parade at the end of the war. Now the Klansmen parade in victory in front of their white community, the community that Griffith has taken great pains to show throughout this entire film. If someone were going to undertake an analysis of masculinities in this movie, they would have to contend with how the Southern whites reclaim their masculine credentials through the actions of the Klan. Notice also the expressions of euphoria on the faces of the Southern men, and the expressions of relief upon the faces of the Southern women. Griffith is now going to show us what the next election is like. And in a reversal of what happened the last time we saw an election in this movie, you will see the Klansmen here disempower the freed blacks of the South, intimidating them through the threat of violence. The freed blacks retreat back into their homes, and white power is assured. In the hands of a lesser director, that would be the end of the movie. We'd have a tidy little bow tie on it, and we could call it a day. But that's not what Griffith is going to give us. This placard seems to indicate that what we are going to see is a tidying up of the romantic plotline involving Elsie and Ben. But Griffith has his eye on a greater prize than the mere completion of the comic plotline. Pay close attention to what the loving couples are looking at as they sit upon the coastline of North Carolina. Notice that Elsie, despite having been rescued from Silas Lynch and being now married to the man she loves, she does not look particularly happy, and this is why. This placard shows that the prospect of bestial war still hovers over her and her community. The victory of the clan has not completely solved any of the problems in the world. While it has perhaps provided a respite from what the movie portrays as the depravities of the freed black race, there is still a lingering issue which needs to be resolved, and Griffith is going to take us in that direction. Giving us a scene that could very well have been in Dante's Inferno, we see War riding atop a pale horse, swinging his sword and killing large numbers of people. The horror of war has not left Elsie's thoughts or Ben Cameron's thoughts. But there is still the hope for salvation, not by earthly actions, but by the second coming of Christ, figured here with his head slightly chopped off by iMovie. Notice that only with the second coming of Christ does peace descend upon the land. Now we have here a vision that's perhaps the beatific vision after the second coming. We see here people acting in peaceful accord with one another. We also should pay attention to the race of the people involved. They are all white. Given Griffith's creation of community earlier in the film, we have to wonder whether they are white because only white people go to heaven, or whether they are white because after the second coming, deracination and assimilation occurs for everyone. The newlyweds sitting on the coast are witness to this vision, and their melancholy visages are going to change as they see what the future holds for them. Notice that only now Ben Cameron is smiling at Elsie in this scene, whereas prior they were still brooding over the previous events in the film. But what is making him smile is not something that will really take place during their lifetimes. What is making him smile is the prospect of the New Jerusalem that will wash away the world he's been living in. And the movie has shown that the world that they have lived in has been an extremely fallen world, one filled with conflict and war. This final placard of the movie, which we only get to see after the beatific vision that we share with Elsie and Ben, can be interpreted in one of two ways. One, it can be seen as a statement about politics in the United States, a point that advocates against war and in favor of liberty and union in very real political terms. But in light of what we have just witnessed, it can also be taken in a very different way. We could interpret this final placard as an indication that will be no such thing as perfect liberty and union in some sort of contemporary utopian paradise. Instead, it is something that must be constantly worked for and strived for until the second coming finally gets rid of bestial war, whom we've just seen riding on his white horse. This indication that hard work is required in a fallen world in order to attain one's goals is mirrored in George's writings towards the end of Uncle Tom's Cabin when he argues for immigration to Liberia. George doesn't say that everything will be great and wonderful in Liberia. He says he expects to work hard for the rest of his entire life, advocating for the liberty of his people. But that this hard work, working in a fallen world, seems pivotal to both works. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, Tom's sacrifice only makes sense in a fallen world because there will be a second coming and an accounting for the sins of those on earth. In The Birth of a Nation, the violence we have witnessed in the film does not bring about a sort of racist utopia in the contemporary present, but is a mere stopgap measure until Christ's second coming, when Christ can correct for the faults of bestial war.